Thank you very much. I'm supposed to follow that?
The microphone.
Yeah. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll go on a bit of a journey. I'm going to take you on a... I got this PowerPoint here. Yeah. Isn't this, is it? Yeah, we'll just organise this. Look, my name is Michael Benson. I'm all the way from Wexford, so hopefully you'll be able to handle my strange accent. Perhaps. I am... not entirely, but when I have spare time, I am a paranormal researcher or a paranormal investigator. Have been for some time. Now, that's probably hard to believe because I'm not wearing an officially sanctioned team jacket with a logo on it. But once I get this started, you'll see we actually have one, so it's fine. I'm legit. Yeah, so it's really just. There should be. If this doesn't work, you're just going to have to look at me for the duration, and that's scary enough in itself. Anyway, try that one. It's a conspiracy. Yeah, Andy was very interesting, actually, and he talks about how people find it hard to challenge what's presently held as convention. And I think that's true, but it's true because that's how we're conditioned. The education system teaches us what to think, not how to think, in my opinion. And I worked in the education system for a while, and even in a class, I wouldn't let the students call me sir. They could call me Michael. And they struggled with that because they'd been conditioned to call you sir. So, how are we doing? Yay. All right, so I'm just going to share my experience of the subject and locations and private cases that I've been involved in. Thank you. There you go, see, so I'm Michael Benson, and as I said, what am I pressing here? Next one. We do have an official logo, so you can trust me now. And because photographic evidence is so important in the field of paranormal investigation, you can clearly see this hasn't in any way been photoshopped. That I am actually standing opposite Loftus Hall, and the sky was actually that colour with a big lens flare in the middle of it. So seeing is believing, maybe? Or is it, believing is seeing as well? I have, for my sins, appeared on a few TV shows on Sky and TG Cahir and RTE. But I'm very cautious about that because television programs about the paranormal and the subject of the paranormal don't always go hand in hand because TV ultimately is about entertainment. So if I go into a location like Loftus Hall and spend a night or two there and nothing happens, there's learning in that for me in terms of the research. But it doesn't make for good TV. So when you've got the likes of Zach, I wear glasses because it's fashionable back in from the States, Ghost Adventures coming to Loftus Hall, he brings 20 special effects guys with him. And the problem with that then is it calls into question the validity of anything that, legitimate, focused paranormal researchers would present as evidence. And if anybody wants to find out in more detail some of the locations I've been in, the History Press released or published a book about 5 years ago, which interestingly enough, I had said to my wife at the time, I'm going to write a bit of this down and I'll send it away and see if there's any interest. And I was about 6 weeks working on the document, on the manuscript, but I hadn't sent it anywhere. And I came home from work one Friday evening about 5:10, and there was an email in my inbox from the History Press in London inquiring if I'd be interested in writing the book that I'd started 6 weeks before that. So my work here is done, I guess. So there you go. And I was in the book centre in Wexford yesterday because I don't have a copy of my own book. I keep giving it away. So I wanted to buy one to bring with me. And she said, sorry, I've just sold the last one. It's been ordered online. Some guy in Waterford is after asking for it. So whoever you are, thank you very much. I can see my royalties shooting up. In fact, I haven't seen any royalties yet. So, from why explore the subject of the paranormal? Now, again, I'm giving you my opinion. But in all sincerity, everything I say is true. And it's true because it's my story, it's my experience. but it may completely contradict somebody else's truth. And that's because as human beings, I think the issue is that we operate at the level of our thoughts about what is, rather than just literally at the level of what is. So for example, if I met you, we got on well, and this Saturday night we go to Castle in Wexford, and we're standing at the foot of the stairs, and across the top of the stairwell we see disembodied legs and rattling chains, and I take out my camera and I'm taking pictures, and I think, this is fantastic. And you turn on your heels and you head out towards the door, which is locked, so there's a human-shaped hole in the wall as you've left. Now, the following weekend, I'm at a pub, talking to my guys, talking to my friends, was in this castle, saw this thing, fantastic experience, best one of my life, can't wait to go back there. And you're talking to your friends and saying, was in this castle, saw this thing, frightened the stomach out of me, and it was the worst experience of my life, and I'm never going back there again. Two conflicting stories, both of which are true, because we're telling it at the level of our thoughts about what is. It's funny, we're having a conversation where one person speaks. It's a bit strange. Actually, it's kind of like paranormal investigation, where you're sitting in a dark room with a radio going, and you're asking questions, and you're hoping that someone's going to come back. I've pursued this for a long time because I had a number of experiences as a younger man. I'm still young. As a younger man. One of which was when I was 12. It was the night before, because I was good. I mean, I'm Irish. I was a good Catholic. Night before my confirmation. And I was out getting a call from my mum. And while I was getting the call, somebody called me by my name, Michael. Didn't see anybody. Carried on again. My name was called a second time. So I went in and said, Mum, what do you want? And I'm not getting the call. She said, I didn't call you. So I went back out. So obviously I'm very slow getting call. And my name was called a third time. So what I did was I turned around and I walked out the gate at the gable end of the house. No, I didn't. I did that the second time. I looked towards the gate at the gable end of the house, which was open because I'd been out there and looked over the wall thinking it was a friend of mine messing about. But when I turned and looked, standing in that open gateway was an old woman, at least a figure of an old woman. But I could see through her, so she was semi-transparent. You know, it wasn't physically dense, it was there, but it was semi-transparent. You know, I went in and I told my mum, and this is where things tend to grow legs. Literally, that's what I saw. What it meant, who it was, I have no idea. But then, you know, my mum, my grandmother, oh, that was your great-granny who, you know, you were the only great-grandchild that was born before she died, and it's your confirmation tomorrow, and she's come back to check in on you, which may be true. But I can't evidence that. I can only share the experience I've had. Anything beyond that then is a projection of narrative, isn't it? I don't know whose water this is, but it's mine now. So, and just to prove it, last week, using a very secret time travel technique that I've perfected, I went back and took a picture of her. That was constructed for the purposes of the book, but it is literally a pretty good representation of the experience that I had and what I saw. That's my mum pretending to be my granny. She didn't get paid. That's why she turned her back on me. Maybe we shouldn't go much further without talking about what is a ghost. You know, human beings, we love to put labels on things. And just another example, actually, before I go on with this. A few years later on, I was 16, you know, and I only thought the paranormal and encounters of apparitions was scary. But at 16, I discovered girls, and I found out that scary had a whole other level, you know. But I've survived it and continue to do so. But at the time, I was seeing a girl over at the back of the old hospital at Wexford, and I called over to see her on a particular evening, and her mum said she's up with her friends up at the racecourse. So my options were to go back the way I came, which was quite a walk around the roads, or to take a shortcut up past the hospital through a wooded area. So I headed into the wood, and as I ventured further in, the sounds of traffic and all human existence started to fade away. When I got roughly to the middle of the woods, I looked to my right, and about 6 or 8 feet off the ground, in the trees, was a white, hooded, cloaked figure. So I started whistling and I turned and my pace certainly quickened. Made my way to her friend's house. When I went in the gate, her friend had a sheepdog who would have been very familiar with me and friendly towards me, who came around the corner of the front door and started to growl and hunched his back and backed away from me. And I thought, what have I brought with me from this woods? So it was quite a sleepless and restless night that night. But curiosity got the better of me, and the next day I said I'm going to retrace my steps and see if I can work out what that experience was and what I saw, or if it's even still there. When I went back in the daytime and back to the location, what had actually been there on the night was a very large metal oil drum. And the drum was black, but each end was white. It was on blocks raised about 6 feet, and with the shape of the trees and branches. What I interpreted, because the human brain is so good with pareidolia, was a figure. So no, I didn't have a paranormal experience that night, but had I not have gone back, I would have forever, to this day, been convinced that I had seen a figure hovering in the air. But those are just a couple of examples as to why I now explore it. The principal part of the work that I do is private houses. So I go to places and explore reports, and on some occasion have experiences that I don't get to share, at least not on paper, at least not identifying the area or the location or the person. Just being mindful of the right of the individual to the privacy that comes with it. But there's a few, and I'm going to talk about one in particular in a little while, but there's a few well-known places that we'll look at in a while. So what is a ghost? Popular thinking considers a ghost to be that of the soul or spirit of a deceased person. And of course, that's according to the dictionary. I think isn't it Collins Dictionary? It is. The non-physical part of a person believed to live on after death. Fair enough. But I don't think that's enough. I don't think it takes us far enough into understanding what potentially it might be. Now, you don't have to believe anything I say, because there are times when I don't believe it myself. But it's important, though. It's important to be open to challenge. I certainly am. I think part of the problem with the field of paranormal investigation with teams, and it's the saddest part of it, is they get so entrenched in their way is the right way, and it's the only way. And religion is the same. Like if you know, Catholics are the only people that are going to go to heaven, are they? If I want to go to Dublin and you want to go to Dublin, we go out the door and I turn left and you turn right. Each of our journeys are singular to ourselves, but on the basis of intention, we will both end up at Dublin. Or am I just being too simplistic? But that's how I see it. Okay. Spirits. Is a ghost and a spirit the same thing? What do people think? Is a spirit and a ghost the same thing? No? Anybody think it is? Yeah, again, it's labels. For me, I like to separate them. I like to think of a spirit as something that has a consciousness that allows it to be aware of me and engage if such a thing is possible. I kind of tend to think of a ghost more like a place memory, like the stone tape theory, where under the right set of circumstances, the memory of an occurrence is captured in the fabric of the location, whether it be a large body of water, lots of limestone. It's the stone tape, it's silica. Well, anything that has large concentrations of silica, they argue, and it's just a theory to be explored, they argue that it has the potential to capture the memory of an occurrence, like the silicon chips in your computers. Is that true? I don't know. But it's like watching John Wayne on a DVD or whoever. You're seeing the memory of something that was captured. It cannot engage with you because it has no consciousness of its own. Now, also, if it's the soul of a previously living person, why do we not see ghost dinosaurs? And why do we see planes that aren't there, houses that are no longer where they used to be, and things like that? Inanimate objects that never had a soul. See that protracted silence? I love playing with silence. It makes people uncomfortable, including myself. But I'm trying to think of where I was going with this. Oh yes, and if, again, it's the soul of a deceased person, why do we see them wearing clothes? Why do we not just see them as God intended, because I'd be so up for that, and as many ladies could visit me as possible. But that's another book. Yeah, so why research it? I think it's important to continually challenge, to test, hypothesize, to test, and test again, because doing that, even a conversation facilitates the advancement of an understanding. I've an opinion based on experience and reading, for example, which I'll share with you. It'll elicit a reaction based on your experience and reading and knowledge. And in the middle of that dynamic, there's learning for both of us. The learning is that either I will change my perspective, having been so eloquently influenced by you, or it will cause me to kind of continue the certainty that I hold. So once you're open to challenge, I think it's so important, but it doesn't happen. So what approach do we take then as well? That's the next thing, Do we take a spiritual approach? And I'm going to be honest, and it's taken me a long time to be honest in this way. I've had experiences in terms of an interpretive manner, or let's call it a mediumistic manner, that I can't explain, which have also led me to want to research the subject. Yes, I did. Yeah, I did. I'm trying to think of one now to give you an example. Would you include dreams in that, for example? Sorry, the lady that was talking earlier, maybe she's gone. But yeah, would you, prophetic dreams, for example, would you consider that an aspect of mediumship? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'll give you another example then. Yeah. I'm not saying that, I'm not presenting that as a personal perspective. I'm just posing the question because they're interesting questions to consider. And sometimes we just take things at face value and don't go, well, actually, why are they wearing clothes? It will establish a timeline, perhaps. If they're dressed Victorian clothes, then we can say, right, late 1800s. So another example then. I was in work one day actually, and I used to be a manager of a day centre for people with sight loss. And one of the staff, for me, around this person all day was this really hyperactive, vibrant energy. And it was just all over the shop. And along with that then, I felt this is a young child of about 7 years of age. But I said nothing until 5 o'clock because I wanted to be off the clock and not be crossing boundaries of responsibility. But I said to her, listen, there's a young energy around you all day and it's all over the place, it's hyperactive. I said, and the letter C connects to this. I said, and who owns the golden Labrador called Charlie? And I said, and this child passed from stomach problems. I said, does any of this make sense to you? And she said, well, I have a friend called Anne who had a daughter, Kira, that died. She said, I think it was chest problems. I said, well, listen, if you choose to tell her, ask her, is there any significance that this will be happening at this point for one thing, and when Mum wasn't even here for another. So she did eventually say to Anne, Anne, do you spell Kira's name with a C or a K? She said, spelled it with a C. She said, what age would Kira be now? She said, well, Kira will be 7 in a few days' time. And she said, but Kira passed from chest problems, didn't she? And Anne said, oh, no, look, a lot of people think that, and we just don't bother explaining to it, but there was complications with her stomach. Now, I find that interesting because, A, I can rule out that I wasn't picking up a vibration from the individual because they weren't there. And I can't explain it. And I must confess, I kept a lid on it for a long time. It wasn't something I was comfortable talking about. But when I discovered that what other people think only matters if it matters to me, that was a very liberating point to arrive at. It only matters if it matters to me, and it's the same for all of us. But I think just maintain that open-minded perspective on it. Do we take a scientific approach? Do we measure electromagnetic fields? Do we look at what the ambient temperature is, what the surface temperature of something is? Do we look at putting geophones on stairs where reports of figures are seen to move to see if, along with actually seeing them, is there physical vibration that happens? Do we use a mixture of both? You know, and this is why teams who investigate the paranormal fight amongst each other so much. You know, just keep doing what you're doing. Don't worry about what we're doing. We might learn something, and you might too. You know, now, here's the thing for me. Belief, certainly from my experience of observation, impacts as observational bias. So if somebody has a deeply entrenched perspective on the subject, they will tend to only see that which fits that perspective and will dismiss everything else. Like 8 out of 10 cats prefer whiskers. You know, what about the other 2? Do they not matter? And it's like, you know, if your wife gets pregnant for the first time and you go into town and suddenly everybody's pregnant. You didn't notice that before, or you buy a silver car and suddenly the town is full of silver cars. It's that observational bias a little bit, you know. Here's another thing that I struggle with. The notion that you can't, in isolation at least, you know, and I say that with respect, you know, to people who are specifically of the spiritual side of it, you cannot use the paranormal to prove the paranormal. So if you witness a table tipping session where you have 4 people around a table and they have their hands on it, the table rocks and it goes on a little jolly jaunt around the house and back again, if I'm one of those 4 people, what can I say that validates that as an actual factual paranormal occurrence? All I can say is that, yes, the table moved. I can say, to the best of my knowledge, I didn't move it in any way, but I can't stand over the other 3 people. I can't rule out subconscious desire. I can't rule out ideomotor control as a possibility. And I've witnessed as well, because we run public nights in Enniscorthy Castle as a means to fund the castle and sustain it as a public amenity. I have never, ever taken as much as 1 cent in the provision of this service, and it's an important part of that for me. It's always, when certain people are at the table behaves in certain ways. You know, now they talk about the transference of energy through the participants that allows a presence, an entity, a spirit to move the table. And that's possibly true, but if it's energy transference, can I not take some sort of a conductor, like a single thread of copper or coil, and hold it to the table and allow for a flow of energy and have the same thing happen? You know, I'm a bit neurotic about testing the theories. You know, it's the same with the equipment that we use. Oh yeah, and is what we consider scientific approach actually scientific? Because we're not in the laboratory. We don't have controls that allow for consistency of tests time after time. Okay, so equipment. We've mediums, pendulums, Ouija boards, table tipping, scrying, dowsing rods. And I'm going to seem like I'm a collection of contradictions. For me, a Ouija board, which garners so much attention in the public domain. I mean, it was a child's toy up to the 60s, and then The Exorcist came out, and we were presented with a whole other perspective on it that wasn't there before. And now it's a portal to hell. It's something that is very damaging to the person that's using it. And yes, it can be. Psychologically, it can be, but it's based on the perspective and beliefs that have been instilled in them from the outset. Possibly. You know, I'm saying that because I'm very mindful that I'm not an expert. I'm just presenting my experiences, and I'm so open to challenge on every one of them. But I have gone on record as saying things like, to me, and just to me, it's not dismissing anybody else's opinion, a Ouija board, it's for me as effective a way of communication as me taking off my shoe and trying to make a phone call with it. For me. But please, correct me, I'd love to be wrong, because I'll have learned something. Now, I'm going to put down the other side as well. Even though I do use all of these things, I spent a fortune on them. You know, night vision cameras, CCTV systems, full spectrum cameras, EVP recorders, geophones, motion sensors, thermal imaging cameras, EMF meters, melt meters, non-contact thermometers, REM pods, tri-field meters, Frank's box, spare box. The list goes on and on. I think it's a little bit like fly fishing. I think a lot of the flies are designed to catch the fisherman, not the fish. But I like to dig deeper, right? Okay, so we use EVP recorders to attempt to capture electronic voice phenomena. What I like to do then is explore that a bit further. So we've got digital systems, we've got analog systems, and we've got valve systems of cassette recorder. So I would be inclined to take all three of those and put them in a room. Now, if I capture an EVP on the digital one, but it's not on the analog or the tube, well, what's that saying about the process with which the communication is received and recorded? You know, so I like to test those things as well. And remember, none of these are built for purpose. They're all designed for other uses, but we apply them to try and test and measure theories within the paranormal field. So if I have a case, for example, where a woman has said to me, you know, I go into the kitchen and I really feel uncomfortable, and the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I feel like I'm being watched. And I say, well, can you show me where that is? And we stand at a wall, and it's 20 plus milligauss, 30 plus milligauss consistency. And on the other side of the wall is the main fuse board for the electricity in the house. Like the last speaker was saying, if that individual is hypersensitive to electromagnetic fields, the way they experience it is feelings of discomfort, hair standing up, feelings of being watched. So yes, you're having the experience, but I can now say to you, but it's for reason A, not reason B. Possibly, because I can evidence reason A, but have I really dismissed reason B? I don't know. I tend to talk very fast. Am I going too fast? I'm a presentation virgin. For some reason I got asked to this, so you're popping my cherry tonight. Thank you for that. I'm glad we could all be here. Feel free to take photos. So locations, I use humor as a defense mechanism, which would explain the dry mouth. I mean, Halloween originates from Ireland, and Ireland is just steeped in allegedly haunted locations. And if you go to Loftus, you'll go to the most haunted. And that, you know, most haunted location drives me mad. Is it not enough that it's haunted? Just, it's haunted. That's haunted, that's haunted. It doesn't have to be the most haunted, unless you get 70 quid instead of 40 if we're going there. Lep Castle. How many people have been on a paranormal investigation or tend to do it? Very good, excellent. Are you involved in a group or?
No, I just went randomly. A friend of mine at work told me that I wanted to do it myself. Is that in Paranormal Garden?
Oh, very good. Right.
I felt and feared more than I saw.
Okay.
But I wouldn't mind doing it again.
Yeah. Well, you can only have a new experience once. That's the great thing about an experience. Lep Castle, there's numerous reports of apparitions and ghostly occurrences there, but the most common one is the elemental, which, if anyone knows Lep Castle or watches Most Haunted, you'll have seen Derek Akora talking about the elemental in the main dining room. It's an entity that has never had human form. I didn't see it. But what did happen, we were all in that particular room, and I'm stood at the very back wall. No one else in the property. And behind me, I could hear two ladies' voices speaking in Irish, but it felt very much like Old Irish insofar as with what Irish I could comprehend. A lot of it didn't make sense to me. And it wasn't room resonance or the acoustics or anything like that. So, and it's a personal experience because I can't evidence that. It's just anecdotal, but that's Lep Castle. It's up in Offaly. Yeah. Sean Ryan is the owner, a very nice man. Ring him up and pay him a visit. He's always open to talking about Lep Castle. This is Charleville Castle. The most kind of well-known spirit is that of a little girl, Harriet, who fell off the stairs. And it's quite a big building, so she's the one who apparently is seen the most. There's a jailer there as well, whose name escapes me now. And I'm just relaying the stories that I've heard. I have facilitated a number of groups up there as well, and we tend to be down in the Fear Thy God room, which is next to the cells and the dungeons. The lights are out. We'd have lasers to see if we capture shadows and things. But again, a personal experience for me, I was stood conducting a session with a group of people when in the darkness, and maybe I just imagined this because, when you don't have stimulus, the brain tends to create things. But this male face literally came right up in front of me and kind of stared me out of it, and I reciprocated, and eventually it went away again. I didn't say anything to anybody at the time. I didn't give it any energy. I didn't give it any power, if that's what I was looking for. If that was in actual fact what I experienced, I could, of course, be completely delusional. Let's not rule that out. Now, this is my spiritual home. It's Enniscorthy Castle. I could do a whole night on talking about this. That's been there since 1169, since the Normans. The version of the castle you see now, it kind of stems from the 1500s, when a businessman, Henry Wallop, who had a huge forestry business there, reconditioned the castle. Cromwell laid siege to it in 1649, and only because of the intelligence of the people in there at the time to surrender very quickly, the castle didn't get destroyed. It was a prison in 1798, and also in 1922 as well. The family was removed from there, and it was used as a military location. And at the time, the Athenaeum, which is a building next to it, the tricolour flew over in Enniscorthy for 4 days. So it's the only place outside of Dublin that rose and flew the tricolour at the time. We got a phone call from the manager. We think we have a ghost. Okay, we'll come and check it out. Arrive up on the night, there's a press photographer and a journalist there, and I'm thinking, okay, this is just propaganda for publicity for the castle. But anyway, we had committed to it, so we went downstairs. There was a number of things happened, but as part of that process, we were using the Frank's box. Now, Frank's box is, are people familiar with what Frank's box is? Let me show you. It's very cutting edge. At least that's what I would have you think. I'm traveling light. We'd normally have a van load of gear, but this is just some small personal stuff. A Frank's box, essentially, is a device that was developed by a guy called Frank Something Something in the States. He's dead now. And he was using it as a means to try and attempt to communicate with his daughter, who had passed away. So it is basically a detuned AM radio. And what it does is it scans the frequency band rapidly, which is what it's doing now. But because it's scanning through the frequency bands at a rapid pace, in principle at least, it should not be able to construct sentences. You'll pick up words, of course you will. You might interpret meaning in just random noise, because audible pareidolia is something we have to consider. But on the night I said, if there's anyone here, can you tell us your name? Now, I don't have the audio with me, but if you want to check it out on YouTube, it's there to be heard. And after a few seconds, it said, Jim. So to try and attempt to more copper fasten the fact that it is responding intelligently to the questions, I said, can you do that again, please? Can you tell us your name? I said, Jim, a second time. And not content, I asked once more. I said, I'm sorry, can I ask you to do that one more time? Can you please tell us your name? At which point, the Frank's box response was, my name is Jim. As much as to say, almost with the sentiment, how many more times are you going to ask me? Right? But at least on 3 occasions, the response was consistent. So that's interesting. Over subsequent visits, we further explored questions. So we got his surname, which we never released publicly, just because when we researched it, there were 2 families of the same surname living in the town, and it was quite an unusual surname anyway. So the possibility was maybe that they were descendants of this guy. He gave us his wife's name, his son's name. Now, that could just be arbitrary responses that we're attaching meaning to. But in any case, we gave all that information to the manager, who then she went off and using that researched in the 1901 census and found Jim, who lived on Island Road, which was just down below the castle. His wife's name was the same. His son's name was the same. And there was somebody else actually in the house as well at the time who wasn't a resident but was there at the time of the census. So to me that's interesting, because that never happens. Never happens that you actually kind of can find historical documentation that will evidence the experience you've had with devices such as that. So go out and buy yourself an AM radio and detune it so it won't stick to a frequency, and then sit for hours in the dark listening to yeah, and see who wins. Will you or the radio go insane first? So when we run the public nights in the castle, I spend 6 hours in the dungeon with groups doing just that. So now you know. It's all explained all of a sudden. Where's that? Yes, it is. And depending on who you ask, it's Ireland's most haunted house. I would challenge that. We were lucky enough to spend a night there before it was last sold. So when Mr. Devericks, who was living in the States, still owned it, we got permission. We were the first team actually to be given permission to go in. The rest of them just go in. That's why the place was as bad as it was. But the story here is that Redmond Hall was built in 1350, and then later it was Loftus Hall was built in its place. Now, in 1650, the Loftus family acquired the property because Cromwell, the year before, had laid siege to it and had allowed, no, actually funny enough, Michael was the owner's name, I can't remember his surname, to remain there. He was in his 70s at the time, but the Loftus family got it in 1650, and then by an act of land, something or other from Britain at the time of 1666, it officially passed into their ownership. And because it was 1666, there's a big thing made of the last 3 digits of the year. Fair enough. Anne Tottenham, who actually died in 1775, as a young girl, this is the story that the handsome stranger arrived at the door one night. Some say from a boat, some say by horse. Doesn't really matter, he got there anyway. And she was infatuated with him, but over a game of cards, a card was dropped. She leaned down to pick it up, and instead of him having feet, he had cloven hooves. When she discovered that he had those, he shot through the roof in a flash of brimstone and was never seen again. But I have a theory, and I'm looking at the occurrences of 1700s or the 1800s with a 21st century perspective. Like, social class was so entrenched and so important, and how you were perceived socially was hugely important. Now, Occam's razor would say where any 2 or more possible explanations exist, the simplest one potentially is generally the one that applies. So, could it be that Anne met this stranger, was infatuated by him, he reciprocated, and 9 months later, the evidence presents itself? So it could be argued that the greater potential was that Anne may have become pregnant, and that this was completely shielded from the awareness of society because of the shame that their status would be impacted on by. So that could be it. She died in 1775. In 1878, so 100 years later, the tapestry room that she was known to reside in was knocked into the room next as well. The 2 rooms were made into one, and it became a billiard room. And then in 1870, as the historical documents attest to, and if you want to read Horace History of Wexford in 1904, you'll find all this. There's of the time depositions. The property was razed to the ground, and the one that we see today was built in its place. Because Queen Victoria apparently had planned to visit, and this was why it was all done. She never came, by the way. But if you take a visit now, the story that you're presented with is that in the early, prior to 1775, the legend that is Loftus Hall took place. Anne saw the hoof. He went through the roof, left a hole in it that could never be fixed. And in 1870, so 100 years later, the property was significantly developed, and they added a 3rd story. So it wasn't razed to the ground. They added a 3rd story. So I took a tour with some of my service users. As I mentioned, I worked with people who were blind and vision impaired, and they wanted to go there. So I said, Michael, go, stand at the back and say nothing, which I did, till it was finished. I said to the guide, I said, let me just check that I have the information right here. 1350 Redmond Hall, yeah. 1649 Cromwell, yeah. 1650 Loftus family get it, yes. 1666 they take the ownership in a legitimate legal sense, correct. And I said in 1870 it was significantly developed. You added a 3rd floor, and to this day there's a hole that can't be seen. She said, that's right. I said, so you're telling me a ceiling that didn't exist till 100 years after the event has a hole in it that can't be fixed? I suspect there's a bigger hole in your story than there is in the house. So it's just look at the little things, the little tells. To me, it's great to see it being enjoyed and utilised. But for me, as a paranormal researcher, if it deviates from what is the evidence of the time, however incorrect that might be, but at least it's of the time. So I have to give that more credence than a story that sells tickets. But it's a fabulous place. If you do get a chance to visit it, do it. I'm not saying don't go. I'm just talking about the story that applies. When we were there, it was actually relatively quiet at night. I set up Wexford Paranormal 12 years ago, and my right-hand man was a chap called Michael Carroll. He dealt with all the tech, and what he didn't know about tech wasn't actually worth knowing. He just a gifted guy and so rational. Sadly, he died last year. He was only in his 50s from cancer within 6 months. And we knew he wasn't well, but he told nobody. He was having treatment and he was going to be better until he wasn't. So it's been kind of hard to get back and not have him there. Maybe he is there, I just don't see him. But this photograph is taken from the stairwell of Loftus, looking down towards the reception area. So you have the front door reception area, and then you're in here. And you can see the black cable. So that's our CCTV cables running around to the various locations in the house, because there's no glass in the panels of the window. Everything in that photograph is sharp and is in focus, except for the flare that's coming through the doorway. Now, I mean, for all the world, it looks like flames. If you were to attribute a context to it, it looks like flames. So when you look at things like the levels of light, the length of exposure, shutter speeds, all those things that might cause motion blur that would give you an effect of that nature, doesn't apply to any of that photograph except for here. Now, the lights in the building, we're looking down at an angle. The incandescent lights are above us. In there, it's the same, and the ceilings are high. So there's nothing that would cause lens flare in a conventional sense that I could identify. So for me, even to now, that's a significantly unexplainable photograph. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be explained. It means I can't explain it. Maybe somebody else can. Or maybe science, as was said in the last presentation, in 6 months or 6 years or 60 years, will catch up and explain why this happens. And for now, we don't know. I'm very careful to call it significantly unexplainable and nothing else. Because if I go to your house and investigate claims, and I get to a point where I cannot explain a phenomena, and I said, look, we explored that point, we captured this footage, I can't explain it. It's significantly unexplainable. If I then label it paranormal by extension, I'm applying a narrative to it that may not be relevant for you. So in actual fact, what we do is we leave it at significantly unexplainable, and that leaves you the space then to conclude for yourself whether on the basis of that you interpret it to be paranormal or not. I'm very conscientious and considerate, really. But honestly, I just think it's for me, that's the way to go, to leave space for the person to yeah. The number of people who will send you photographs and ask you to explain the orb that's in the photo. Like, what are they? Are they the first stage? Some people would argue they're the first stage of a spirit manifestation, especially if you're a vet fielding and you're trying to sell TV time. Some would say that it's nothing more than environmental contaminants such as dust particles, bugs, moisture in the air, or little bits of lint that float about. Would anybody think they are the first stage of a spirit manifestation? Yeah? Experiments have been done, right? So, again, people attach narrative. So if there's a photograph of me sitting in my grandparents' house, and they had passed away 12 months earlier, and right beside me is an orb the size of my head, people are going, well, people who want to attach connection and meaning to it would say, that's actually your granddad Bill, who, he's just there. It's great, isn't it? And they get a comfort from that. Now, when we talk about photographs, first thing is it's a two-dimensional representation of a 3D world. So you're going to have to consider things like forced perspective. Ooh, look, there's an orb. Big as his head. There's one bigger. I hope it doesn't hit him. And there's another one here. in a church. These are all public domain photos. They're off the internet. I don't know any of these people, which is why I've picked them, just to demonstrate the point. Can we say with certainty that that is an artifact physically as big as that person's head? Or is it a microscopic particle of dust millimeters from the lens that has flash bounce and has been captured as a result? In my opinion, in 100% of the case, that's what it is. And tests have been done. So people developed a stereoscopic camera. Two lenses, 77 millimeters apart, which is roughly the space between the human eye. And with that camera, if you took this photograph, the possibility is that that artifact would be in the one from the right-hand lens, but yet it's not visible in the one from the left-hand lens. And all I can infer from that is that it wasn't out there, because if it was, both lenses would have picked it up, that it was very close to this lens, which is why this one didn't get it. You know, so those types of experiments have been done. Plus, there's a friend of mine up the north who, neurotic as he is, took him and a couple of other guys almost 250,000 photographs in a vacuum and captured not one artifact when there was no air in it. When they let air in and took more photos, artifacts appeared in the shots. Okay, so we can demonstrate how environmental anomalies present in the photos. I've never seen anything that I can't say isn't that, but again, I'm not so entrenched in a perspective that I would dismiss it entirely. I just hope somebody can show it to me. I really do. But that's what keeps us doing it, I guess. Pareidolia mentioned it earlier. Look at the, exactly. It's an elephant's ear. It's nothing else but an elephant's ear, but the human brain. I think it's the prehistoric flight or fright aspect of us. I think it's the amygdala. We'll seek form in randomness to know whether or not to run after it and kill it and eat it, or to run away because that's going to do the same thing to me. Apparently. How are we doing? So you've captured your findings. What do we do now? What to do? Have we captured proof? Have we? No? We may have, but I would never label it as proof. Proof is a huge burden to carry when you're involved in this subject. It's certainly evidence, right? So if I take away the burden of proof from what I do, and I go on a journey that's focused on gathering evidence, then, hopefully, over time, that evidence might lead to the discovery of a truth. Because no matter what I have evidentially that I present to you, if you're not open to it, it's not going to be proof anyway. So I've got rid of the whole issue of proof. I don't burden myself with it. I continue to capture evidence and anomalies, and when that's available, along with everybody else's exploration of the subject, we may well lead to the discovery of a pertinent truth. And, you know, finding an answer only has a value if it leads to the next question anyway. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being gentle with me.
Okay. Any questions for Michael?
And thank you for staying.
Hi, Michael. Interesting talk. Just two questions. One is, have you ever felt malevolent threat from the experiences you've had? And the second one is, as you mentioned yourself, photographs only capture the physical world. And if something is paranormal or a ghost, and you try and photograph it, and it is otherworldly, it's not going to appear in the photograph. And I suppose the paranormal experience is so unique because it is just that one moment. You know, you can't photograph it as such. But that's my question.
Yeah, like it's almost a contradiction, really, isn't it? You know, but I did. Sure, you saw the photograph of the old woman that you could see through. I captured it. You know, the problem is the camera never lies, is now gone. You know, malevolence. Yes. When we talked about observational bias earlier on, I mentioned, you know, how we see silver cars or pregnant women, if that's the case. I've worked with a few demonologists who everywhere they go will find demons. I've been doing this a long time. I've been in a lot of places. I have yet to encounter a demon. You know, so that's, to me, the observational bias. But in terms of malevolence, yes, I have experienced it. But on one occasion in 12, 15 years. And it was a funny one because very quickly now I'll tell you this. It was a private house in Wexford. It's chapter 5 in the book. And what happened was the family, because of the occurrences, had moved out of the house. So, for example, the cleaning lady that they had been pushed across the sitting room one afternoon, and the kids would be up in the third floor playing. When they'd come down for their tea, you could hear playing continuing up there, all this kind of thing. But they had left the house and rented it out. The family who rented it experienced the same thing with no prior knowledge of the owners having had it. They left. It was rented a second time. The second family left. So when they contacted us, the great thing was there was no power going to the house, none. So it was dead in terms of electrical fields. And we baselined the place and it was flat. I had a generator running out in the driveway to power our equipment. When we were setting up, Michael Carroll, who was 6 foot something and a big guy and very down to earth, so he wasn't prone to flights of fancy. While he was setting up the CCTV on a tripod, a piece of architrave from a doorway flew up past him, and he was the only one in the hall, and for him to come and report that, I'm like, what? Because, we don't go looking with the expectation of something is going to happen. We kind of think it's not, and then if it does, that's great because we can explore it. But the issue was we took a break. I was in the kitchen. The CCTV was on the breakfast bar. Monitor here facing out. So 3 of my female crew were sitting on the other side of it and were chatting away. The monitor went off and I thought, petrol. I have to go and put petrol into the generator. But when I looked down, the pilot light was still on the plug socket and the DVR was still recording. So I thought, okay, it's the lead, it's the fuse. I changed the lead, changed the fuse, and it still wouldn't come on. So I said, look, it's fine, guys. We can't see the cameras, but when we review the footage later on off the DVR, it'll be fine. We'll have a look at it. So 10 minutes later, we're still talking away. The pilot light on the monitor came on. The monitor illuminated. We could see all the cameras. And the girl said, oh, it's back on. Oh, it's gone off again. I said, no, it can't have come back on. Yeah, it did. They said, the light came on. We could see the cameras. I said, I know, I saw that too. But it can't have come back on. And they said, why? I said, because for the last 10 minutes, I've been standing with the plug in my hand. Now, I know capacitors will hold power, but I don't believe a capacitor will retain power and then fire it off 10 minutes later. I would think it would have dissipated before that. Now, I'm open to correction, but it was quite an experience. But it was the most active and most potentially malevolent experience that I've had in that house. Very negative towards the women. The thermal imaging camera that we use, we've a procedural practice where we take an infrared photo simultaneously. So we've a reference. 4 of the women were sitting around a table in the sitting room. It was a glass table, so we put black card on it so there's no reflection, so you don't get false anomalies from the thermal camera. And when you look at the photograph, you can see the 4 women with their 4 hands on the table, right hands, and in the thermal imaging camera, there's a left hand, a 5th left hand, with a significant temperature difference. Now, the counter argument there is, well, sure, somebody else from the team when you were sitting up had left their hand there and it was just residual heat. But apart from the guy taking the photo, which was Michael, who had come in after they had got themselves sorted, no one else was in there. Now, it could have been one of their hands, but it's a great photo.
Any other questions? Julie?
Thanks a million. Michael, I was just wondering, have you had, what's your opinion on fairies and fairy forts, and have you had any experience or any encounters, or, it's just, you hear so much of people with fairy forts, if they, dig into the bank or destroy a fairy fort, that for generations they have bad luck in the family. I just think it's quite interesting.
Sure, there was a big thing in the Midlands with that motorway, wasn't there? Going through a fairy fort or something. The answer to your question, no, but that's only because I've never explored or investigated them. It tends to be either locations like I've shown you or private cases. So, I can't give comment to that because I just have no experience.
Just one more question here, so.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Michael. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. In our house, there's in the hallway, there's like a line. Now, I don't see them, but my husband has seen like a little witch, with the hat on, just walking across the hall, and indeed the house when we bought it was owned by 4 sisters, and when the last of the sisters died, the lights were going crazy, going on and off all the time, and I was hoovering as well, and somebody switched off the hoover, like what you said with the switch. There was nobody there, and but also my daughter Orla is here as well. But the kids have seen even a ghost, like, or a person, a young girl, long hair, and two of them saw it together, and they were about 12 or 13 at the time. So they went to school and they were telling everybody, and, oh my God, the gardener's house is haunted, and you know. But my one question is, do you do anything like for soul retrieval, or, you know, to burn sage, or like these are spirits that are obviously lost in
Possibly.
you know? So is there anything like that, you know, you can burn sage?
There are people who will do that and specialize in it and are very good at it. But I'm very explicitly clear with people from the outset. Our job is to go in and either corroborate or debunk their experiences. But the information we give them then affords them the next informed choice, which for them might be to have it cleansed or whatever, but that's not our brief, and we don't do that.
Okay, good stuff.
Thanks, folks.
A round of applause for Michael. Great guy. Thanks, Michael. So